Today we will be discussing the youth imprisonment of Indigenous populations in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We will be using the 5 key concepts of the Indigenous, crime, criminal justice, the state, and colonisation in presenting explanations to the overrepresentation of the Indigenous youth in New Zealand prisons. To have a clear understanding of what we are talking about in this issue, we will first of all define the 5 key concepts. Firstly, the Indigenous refers to the original people of a land. In the case of New Zealand, this is the Māori population. They are the Indigenous people because while Māori populations were already residing in New Zealand, it was colonised by European settlers. This brings us to colonisation. Colonisation is a deliberate invasion of another's home, territory and culture to their own benefit. The Europeans turned New Zealand into a capitalist society for their own economic benefit through the process of primitive accumulation. Colonisation led to the creation of the settler colonial state of New Zealand. This was set up by the British government to hold supreme authority. Because New Zealand's system of governance was set up by European settlers, it has been and continues to be founded on European ideologies of individual liberty, equality, and freedom. It is this settler colonial state that determines what constitutes as a crime. Crime in modern New Zealand can be defined as any act against the modern state. This may not align with what is right and wrong in Māori culture. For example, Māori culture has a different way of conceptualizing crime. To Māori, committing a hara is committing a harm to not just the individual, but also the collective. Criminal justice in New Zealand is also controlled by the state. Criminal justice refers to the area within the criminal justice system that controls how perpetrators of criminal acts are punished. The overrepresentation of Māori populations in New Zealand prisons refers to statistics that show the proportion of Māori individuals in prison is greater than the proportion of Māori individuals in New Zealand society. Those that identify as Māori make up approximately 15% of the New Zealand society. Assuming Māori ethnicity is not a factor in incarceration rates, you would expect to see 15% of the prison population to also be Māori. However, a study by Simone Bull states that 42% of women and 44% of men in New Zealand prisons identify as Māori. These statistics hold true for Māori youth populations too, with 54% of the youth cases in court involving Māori. So why does this occur? Quince argues it is important to understand the issue of overrepresentation as being related to being Māori. This means we should look further into the confounding variables associated with being Māori, including colonisation, which had a huge impact on Māori individuals. For example, Māori land alienation and cultural assimilation. When addressing the issue of overrepresentation of Māori youth in prison, Jill Worrell suggests the majority of young offenders come from families who have a long history of social and personal disadvantage. This demonstrates the intergenerational effects of colonialism. This raises an important point around the fact that many adults within families have a huge influence on their children, giving reason for the government to focus on stopping youth offending at the earliest point of hindrance. This includes increasing family cooperation in addressing offending and allowing children to develop their own opinions about what is right and what is wrong. The injustices in the criminal justice system that influence the Māori incarceration rates include that Māori were less likely to have a court case dismissed and are less likely to have knowledge of ways to defend themselves in court. Compared to Europeans specifically, Māori were less likely to be represented by counsel and more likely to plead guilty for an offence. This doesn't mean that Māori are more often guilty compared to Europeans. It more likely shows a disparity in the strategies used by Europeans and Māori in navigating the criminal justice system. This demonstrates the disadvantage for Māori citizens. Today demonstrates the struggle that the Indigenous have had through statistical evidence. This problem has mainly come about through colonisation and its intergenerational effects, which has led to the overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples in New Zealand prisons. The concepts of the state, criminal justice, crime, colonisation, and the Indigenous all relate through the undeniable injustice that exists towards the Indigenous.